hope to get into a discussion on a sector that affects the well-being of Sri Lankans, or rather everyone, and that is the healthcare system. And we have with us Mr. Raghuram Ramakrishnan, a senior analyst from NDB Securities, joining us. A very good evening to you.
It's been a pleasure to be here.
Yes,
Thanks.
let's start the conversation by giving an overall picture of the current healthcare system in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, when it comes to a healthcare system in Sri Lanka, the public sector has been in the forefront since 1930s. Sri Lanka adopts a free healthcare model since 1930s, and as far as our healthcare system efficiency is concerned, and Sri Lanka has achieved several remarkable landmark achievement in compared to regional peers and almost in par with the developed countries. WHO, World Health Organization, have few indicators such as child mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, prevalence rate of HIV and TB. If you actually looked at child mortality rate in Sri Lanka in 1990, it was around 18 and it has up to 8 in 2012. Similarly, if you take maternal mortality rate from 85 in 1990, it has dropped to 39. So Sri Lanka has achieved this remarkable healthcare system. Mainly, I would like to attribute the fact the government's continuous effort in providing free healthcare as well as free education. If you actually look at the overall spending of the government over the last 15 years, which has recorded the 15-year compound annual growth rate of 13.7, whereas the spending on the education at the rate of 15.4 and the spending on the healthcare has been at 14.7. So I would like to attribute this immense success in healthcare efficiency to the government's continuous effort in providing healthcare, free healthcare as well as free education.
Okay, if you look at from the investor's perspective, do private sector listed hospitals look attractive for investments?
It is. If you actually look from healthcare index, since January 2009, the healthcare index has been growing. I mean, it always been in the growth trajectory, even though it hasn't outperformed the overall ASP until end of 2015. From 2015, the healthcare index started to outperform overall index, mainly due to two reasons. The one reason is there were talks that the government is looking to diversify Lanka Hospitals holding, and as well as a TBG US-based fund getting into one of the private hospitals. But if you look from investors' point of view, especially foreign investors' point of view, the Sri Lanka's healthcare stocks are really attractive if you compare with Asia, developed Asia, emerging, and the global. So on that regard, I feel the healthcare index or healthcare sector in Sri Lanka for the stock market investors is still look attractive. And then again, but investors should have to do their own homework, and they have to check each financials and do their own homework beforehand they invest in. But overall, if you look from the global point of view or the foreign investors' point of view, Sri Lanka look attractive for investment purposes.
Okay, if you look at the supply chain, do we have adequate resources to manage the demand in the healthcare sector? What are supply constraints?
Yeah, so the demand side, almost all the critic about the healthcare sector would agree the demand for healthcare sector is immense in Sri Lanka, mainly be driven by non-communicable disease, aging population, increasing per capita income. But if you look at the supply side, about 90% of the infrastructure in the healthcare sector is still within the government segment. And unfortunately, government is not in the position to prop up their spending on the healthcare expenditure because they have various other front to look into, and they have fiscal constraints. So going forward, with the demand being created, the private sector has to fill the gap. And with overall government management or the regulatory in place, we feel like the private sector will have to play the major role by spending on capital formation. So there is immense of demand will be created, but then again there is a bit of supply constraint, and we hope the private sector would fill the gap.
Okay, you mentioned about non-communicable diseases, NCDs. What are the measures taken to curtail NCDs which will support the control of public expenditure?
Non-communicable diseases, as the name implies, is also known as chronic disease. So it tend to last longer and take very slow way in progression, and sometimes it will last until the patient die. Globally, the NCDs related death is about 38 million, which is roughly around 80% of the overall death, and nearly 50% of the death is happening through cardiovascular, followed by cancers, respiratory diseases, and diabetics. In Sri Lanka also reflect a similar trend with in 2015 roughly 75.2% of the death is happening through NCDs, and out of which 40% attributable towards cardiovascular. So going forward, we expect the non-communicable disease pattern would continue, mainly due to the lifestyle of Sri Lankan, especially urbanization, aging population, and increasing per capita income has resulted in sedentary lifestyles among Sri Lankans. But as far as the measurement being taken, the government is in the right place, and in their annual report that they have mentioned from 2014 to 2020, they have plans to come up with new equipment, especially the screening, because non-communicable disease is the one how you can identify is through screening. So government has planned and have identified few hospitals to fix few X-ray machines, CT scan and MRI scan. So the government has done the preventive measures in order to allocate capital towards the diagnostic services, but we also feel the private sector also plays their role in order to battle the non-communicable disease as a whole unit.
All right, and we see a rising trend in the aging population in Sri Lanka. So what are your thoughts on that and the impact on the healthcare sector?
Aging population is the second largest demand driver going forward in Sri Lanka. Not only in Sri Lanka, but almost major countries, including Japan and European countries, are facing this issue. The aging populations is mainly happening due to two reasons. One is decline in total fertility rate. Total fertility rate is defined as number of birth a woman can give before she turns 50. In Sri Lanka, if you actually looked at in 1945, the TFR was 5 and it had come down to 2.5 in 2015. The life expectancy rate is increasing, and that has resulted in the median population among Sri Lankan is to increase. Back in 1945, median population of Sri Lankan was around 23 and it has become 30 in 2015. The aging population not only gives the issues in the healthcare sector, but also it will have some impact on the economic front. If you take economic growth is mainly driven by three factors. One is labor, capital and total factor productivity. Okay. So when the aging population increases and you don't have enough labor supply, a particular country would face economic growth stagnant. So we are in the situation our aging population is increasing. Back in 2012 we had about 12.4% as 60 plus population, and now we expect that to go up to 16.1 in 2021. So government will have to face these issues, and they'll have to allocate more resource towards geriatrics care, as well as government have to look to other mode how they can prop up the economic growth. But what they can do is they can draw parallel, or they can get a few ideas from European countries and especially Japan. When you take Japan, Japan has the largest aging population in entire world. It's about roughly 20%. How do they tackle that is in 1961 itself they have introduced a mandatory insurance scheme for every citizen, and from 2001 they have made it mandatory for everyone to have a long-term insurance plan. When you have long-term insurance plan and from the moment you are no longer economically active, then government will look after you. And they also have few plans called Angel Scheme. What the scheme is, they have incentivized to have more children, as well as they have encouraged women force to take part in the labor force. So government can take few parallels and they can introduce few insurance scheme going forward in order to tackle this aging population effectively going forward. Okay,
in your view, a very brief answer I'm expecting from you. What measures should be taken to strengthen the public healthcare system in Sri Lanka? Very brief answer.
Yes, I would like to say government has to introduce, with all parties being included, they have to introduce a proper insurance scheme in place. As one you see in Japan, it's a government-sponsored insurance scheme. In Singapore, employer-sponsored insurance scheme, and in UK again, NHS is again a taxation-sponsored insurance scheme. So I would expect the government is right now in the track, or right now in the need of the hour to introduce a proper insurance scheme in order to make sure every particular citizen in the country will have safe access towards the healthcare facilities in the country.
All right. Thank you very much, Raghu, for joining us.
Thanks.
And with that, yes?
It's been a pleasure to discuss about the most promising sector in the country, the healthcare, and thanks a lot for inviting me to have a discussion on this sector. Thanks a lot.
Definitely. We really appreciate your presence here. And with that, we are ready to wind up for today. And thank you for being with us. We will see you next week, same time on Channel I. Until